Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Justice Without Borders. I'm Stella.
And I'm J1. Today we are diving into a fascinating and often overlooked question in the study of American history, where transnational solidarity movements, a significant part of civil rights movement of the 1960s.
J1, do you have any opinion of or translation? Solidarity movements a significant part of the civil rights movement on the 1960s, based on your research.
Yes, the civil rights movement of the 1960s was not isolated. It was part of a global fight against oppression, shaped by international leaders, movements, and political pressure.
Okay, thank you for answering. And I'm gonna talk about Gandhis. So let's do the interview of the Gandhis first.
If England does not grant your demands, what course of action will you follow then?
Of course, civil disobedience and all other phases of Satyagraha are always at our disposal, but whether we shall resort to this weapon immediately or what other steps we shall take, I cannot judge at present.
If England grants your demands, Mr. Gandhi, do you intend to have complete prohibition in the new Indian state?
Oh, yes.
Absolute prohibition.
Absolute.
And do you intend also, if India wins its independence?
At first glance, most people see the civil rights movement as a purely domestic issue. African Americans fighting segregation and racism in the United States. But after a week of research, examining both primary and secondary resources, including videos, interviews, documents, and academic sources, we discovered that this movement was deeply connected to global struggles for freedom.
That's right, from Gandhi's nonviolent resistance in India to Pan-Africanism, the opposition against the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement intersect with many international efforts for justice. So today we will explore how global influences shape the movement, how American activists connect with struggles abroad, and why international pressure mattered so much during the Cold War.
Before we examine those international connections more broadly, let's begin with the global figure who shaped the movement, Score Plaspe.
India's national pride rose in revolt. Patriotic urge to action moved the people. It was a spontaneous mass upheaval. The temper of the people rose, and so did the temper of the alien government. 6 days after the internment,
Let's start with one of the movement's most powerful inspiration, Mahatma Gandhi. So, Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha, or non-violent resistance, became a blueprint for United States civil rights leaders. Most famously, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. After reading about Gandhi's success in India, Dr. King began incorporating nonviolence into his approach to social change. In 1959, Dr. King visited India to learn more about Gandhi's movement. He called the trip one of the most meaningful experiences of his life. He met with Gandhi's followers, visited historical protest sites, and deepened his belief that love and non-violence were stronger than hate and oppression.
And this wasn't just about inspiration. King took real lessons from Gandhi and turned them into action in the United States. We see this clearly in peaceful tactics like Montgomery bus boycott, sit-ins, and freedom rides. These were modeled on Gandhi's civil disobedience campaigns. In fact, peaceful resistance became a moral foundation of civil rights movements. Protesters stayed calm even when attacked by police dogs, sprayed with fire hoses, and arrested. It showed the world that their cause was righteous and just, and that violence was coming from the system, not the protesters.
Gandhi's legacy did not just inspire the king. It echoed across movements in South Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. So American civil rights leaders saw themselves as part of this growing global family fighting injustice. Building on Gandhi's legacy, civil rights leaders began to look more directly toward Africa, where new nations were rising and demanding independence from colonial powers.
Next, let's talk about Pan-Africanism. This was the idea that people of African descent across the globe shared a common history and destiny. Leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson, and later Malcolm X believed that the Black liberation in America was connected to decolonization movements in Africa. W.E.B. Du Bois even attended peace conferences and supported independence efforts in places like Ghana and Kenya. He believed the color line, the divide between white power and non-white people, was a global issue.
In 1957, Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African country to gain independence from European colonizers. Martin Luther King Jr. attended the ceremony. He described it as deeply emotional, calling it a beacon of hope for both African Americans.
Then there's Malcolm X. In 1964, he took a trip across the African continent, visiting Egypt, Ghana, Nigeria, and Algeria. He met with revolutionary leaders and even addressed the Organization of African Unity. He argued that the United States violated human rights and wanted to bring the issue of racism before the United Nations. He saw the civil rights fight as not just an African American issue, but a global one, a fight between the oppressed and the oppressors. This framing helped elevate civil rights to the level of international law. These ideas of global justice didn't stay in theory. They were actively practiced by youth activists who pushed the civil rights movement into international territory.
By the mid-1960s, groups like the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, began widening their focus from civil rights in the South to global justice. They say a direct link between political injustice at home and imperialism abroad. One major turning point was their opposition to the Vietnam War. Many Black Americans were being drafted to fight for a country they didn't protect their right.
That's when SNCC leaders like Stokely Carmichael, who later changed his name to Kwame Ture, started connecting the Black Power movement with the freedom struggles of colonized nations. They weren't alone. Across college campuses in Mexico, France, Germany, and Japan, students were rising up for democracy and against authoritarian regimes. In South Africa, black activists were drawing inspiration from the United States civil rights movement while fighting apartheid.
SNCC also sent delegation to Africa and Asia. One of their leaders, Timothy Jackins, reminded the public that SNCC spoke out against global injustice, even before Dr. King's famous anti-war speech. They were truly thinking beyond borders. As activists expanded their global vision, the world also began watching the United States more closely and reacting.
Now, here's where things get even more tragic. The United States, during the Cold War, wanted to appear as the world's moral leader, a shining example of democracy. But images of black Americans being beaten in the streets, denied education, or even taken ballot were broadcast across the world.
The Soviet Union used those images to argue that the United States was hypocritical. How could it claim to support democracy abroad while allowing racism at home? The global embarrassment put real pressure on United States leaders.
And it worked. Part of reason civil rights legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 got passed was because the United States wanted to protect its image. Activists knew this. They internationally appealed to global audiences. They framed their struggle as a human rights issue, not just a national one. These political battles were supported by powerful cultural connections that helped unify movements around the world.
Let's also talk about music, books, and ideas. The civil rights movement was not just about protest. It was a cultural revolution. Songs like We Shall Overcome echo across continents. Books about civil rights were translated and passed around universities worldwide. Speeches were shared in classrooms and newspapers in Latin America, Africa, and Asia.
Even today, we see echoes of this. The killing of George Floyd in 2020 sparked global protests from London and Berlin to Seoul and Cape Town. People around the world echoed the same calls voiced in the 1960s: dignity, justice, and equality. The legacy of Gandhi and King lives on, not just in books and speeches, but in the living momentum of movements like Black Lives Matter.
return to our question, were transnational solidarity movement a significant part of the civil rights movement of the 1960s?
Yes, absolutely. From Gandhi's philosophy to a Pan-African unity, from the Cold War to the Vietnam War, from SNCC's global outreach to students uprising worldwide, the civil rights movement was truly